Well, good morning. You guys look great. You sound great this morning, unless you were sitting next to someone that didn't, but the rest of you sounded great. Why don't you turn to someone around you, say, hey, you sounded great, you look great, happy Easter. Cafe as well, you guys do it. I like to create an opportunity for all the single people. That was your moment right there. That was it. If you're married, I say this all the time, stay in your lane, all right? Hey, my name's Chris. And so good to be with you. Those of you joining the cafe, watching online, whether you're here with us for the first time or maybe it's been many times, this is the Super Bowl for us. We celebrate the most significant event in human history. And my name is Chris. I get to be one of the pastors around here. And if I haven't met you, I would appreciate the opportunity at some point to meet you. So introduce yourself to me, but enough about me. I want to today start by telling you about a guy by the name of Wago Niev. He was born in 1961. He lives in the Appalachian Mountains. Any App State fans? Yeah. Both of you. Recruiters, take note. You need to come to church on Sundays, recruit. There's a lot of people in here that you recruit for App State. Apparently, it's very close by. If you know anything about the area of the Appalachian Mountains, which is where Wago Niev is from, if you've never been there, there are certain portions, not all of it, but certain portions that are, shall we say, off the grid a little bit, in some ways behind society in 30 years in social life and technology and other things. And some of you are like, yeah, exactly. That's why people move there in retirements, to be off the grid. But this guy, Wago, is some type of philosopher. He has developed what some would call a cult-like following. If you're looking on the outside, kind of looking in, it probably looks a lot like a church. But the fascinating thing for me, as I researched him, is he did this with no technology, no marketing, no podcast, if you can believe that. Like he literally, he's kind of behind the times. And so this is fascinating to me. He's got this global voice teaching, again, what some would kind of identify on the outside looking in as a religion about how to connect with God. And his teachings have gone literally all over the globe, even though he's actually never written anything down. Some of his followers did. And here's how I learned about him. A few years back, I took a trip to Germany. I had the opportunity to work with some churches in Germany. And when we first arrived there, the minute that people found out I was from North Carolina, they immediately started to ask me about Wago Niev. They were super excited. But the problem is this. Like many of you in the room, I had never heard of him. So they're all excited. They're wanting to ask questions. And so they end up telling me about him. And they tell me about how he's changed their life, his way of thinking, his philosophy, all of these things. And again, as I'm watching what they're doing and listening to what they're describing something that sounds very much like a church gathering. And they were all living according to these beliefs and these behaviors that they learned from Wago Niev, 1961 born, Appalachian Mountains. This guy. So again, it's just perplexing to me. And then it gets even more wild. On that same trip, we flew from Germany to Moldova. For those of you that don't know Moldova, it's still predominantly Russian-speaking from the times of the Soviet Union, which, by the way, for those of you that don't know, Rocky Balboa and Rocky IV ended the Cold War. I don't know if you guys know that. If I can change, you can change, and we all can change. If you're under the age of 40, you don't know what's happening. The rest of you, you're going to be watching Rocky IV tonight. You're welcome for that. He functionally ended the Cold War with his great speech, but predominantly Russian-speaking. But the same thing happened to me in Germany. The minute they find out that I'm from North Carolina, all they want to talk about is this guy right here, Wago Niev. And they're asking me questions, and it's the same thing all over again. They're this cult-like following. They're living according to his worldviews. And then they tell me this. And at this point, I only know about him because I learned about him from the Germans, right? So they're telling me all about it. And then they tell me this, the same thing. They're following his teachings, his way of life, all this stuff. Embrace this. It looks like a church from the outside. And check this out. They tell me that these gatherings exist all over Central America, all over Europe, and East Asia. Like, they're all over. And I'm like, my mind cannot wrap around this. So on the plane ride on the way home, I did a little bit of research, and it was hard to find, but it turns out that he has an estimated 4 million followers worldwide. And this guy, again, this is the part that's interesting to me. He's never traveled. Like, he's never traveled more than 91 miles from his home, never literally been on an airplane, no passport, no internet, no mobile phone. So how in the world could I travel from North Carolina to Germany and into Moldova and then find people that know about this individual, Fuego from the Appalachian Mountains? It was mind-boggling to me. And here's the thing, as I thought about it, it didn't even seem possible. And the reason it didn't seem possible was because it was impossible. And so I kept thinking about it, kept trying to figure it out, and there was simply, no matter how I did the math, there was no way that this should have been possible. Now, here's my confession. While I did take the trip to Germany and Moldova, I made up the story about Fuego Niev. Some of you are like, I was Google searching him right then and there. You're like, I couldn't find anything on him. You should put your phones up during church. Unless you're very spiritual and you're on the Bible app, of course. Then you can use it, right? Now, here's the second part of the confession. While this is a made-up part of the story, it is based on a true story. This is very similar to the story of Jesus. This is what happened with him. He never traveled more than 91 miles from his home. That's basically from here to Greenville, South Carolina. He didn't have a passport, never got on a plane, no iPhone, no internet, no podcast. He's a homeless Jewish rabbi at the turn of the century in the midst of the Roman Empire. And now 2,000 years later, there are people gathering in his name all over the world. 2,000 years later, the book that captures his story, the Bible, is the best-selling book in human history. Some estimates say 7 billion copies. It's interesting, there's been a surge of interest in the Bible in recent generations in the last couple of years. In fact, there was one year where Bible sales jumped 22% inside of 1 year, which means the hunger and the interest and the curiosity around this man, Jesus, this homeless Jewish rabbi from the turn of the century, isn't diminishing as you would expect that it would, but is actually increasing. People that don't speak Greek follow Jesus all over the world and believe that he's the Son of God. If you can wrap your mind around that, believe that he is actually who he said he was, that he is the Savior of the world. And here's what I would say about this story. It should have never made it out of the first century. Like, it never should have even been here. Yet here we are gathering around the world talking about this reality. 4.5 billion people on the planet that would say that they believe Jesus is who he said. And the question is, how? Because again, this is impossible, yet here we are. And so I would say to some of you, even if you don't believe this, like I realize on Sundays in particular, like Easter, there are some of you are like, hey, listen, I'm just here to take a picture with my mom. It's proof of life, right? You know, we're going to do that, and then we're going to have some, like, I'm just here for the dinner afterwards, the lunch, whatever. Like, there are some of you that maybe somewhere along the way you left all of this. Maybe you never came to this to begin with, and this is not your circle. Maybe for some of you, you're coming back to it from a long hiatus, and you're trying to figure out kind of what all this is about. Even if you don't believe in this, here's what I would say. You should not ignore it, because it's not possible. It doesn't make any sense what we're doing here today, yet this is where we are. And I believe it's because it happened. And it changed the fabric of human history. And the implications for your life and the implications for my life are staggering. So I would argue that what we celebrate today is the most significant event in human history. And most pastors around our country and around our world will stand up today and they'll tell some version of this story of the resurrection of Jesus. We're going to jump past the crucifixion. We're going to talk largely about the resurrection. And they will say something like this, or they will insinuate something like this, that we should believe in the resurrection of Jesus because the Bible says so. And here's the thing. I actually agree with this, and I understand what they're trying to say, and I believe in the Bible, but it's actually the other way around. The very reason that we have a Bible is because of the eyewitnesses of this story. It's because of the resurrection. Here's what I mean. There are people that actually saw this. There are people that spent time with Jesus, that were his companions. They shared meals with him. They saw the miracles that he did firsthand. And then they saw him die on a cross, and then they had breakfast with him on the beach afterward. They saw it, they engaged with it, they experienced it. And then they documented what they saw, probably because they knew no one's going to believe this story unless they hear it probably from multiple people who were eyewitnesses of this story. So we call these the eyewitness accounts. You got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, eyewitness of these accounts. Mark was writing on behalf of Peter. He was a traveling companion of Peter, who was an eyewitness. Peter probably couldn't read and write. He was probably illiterate, but he wrote down the experiences of Peter. You got Luke, who says that he thoroughly investigated these things. Like he made sure that he covered every single detail, interviewed multiple people. You got John, the best friend of Jesus, an eyewitness of all of these things. And they write down everything that they see. And here's what's interesting. These accounts, these historical documents, are the most accurate or the most verifiable from their time period. And that's not just Christians that agree on that. Everybody agrees on that. Even people that don't necessarily assent to the fact that Jesus is the Son of God would agree that these are the most accurate historical documents from their time period. Now, most scholars agree that men that were actually with Jesus wrote these documents. But through the years, there are some that have tried to discount the historical documents, to say that they were either made up or they were fictional, but it just doesn't hold water, the idea that they were fictional. And there are a lot of examples of that. But for me, and just for the sake of time, one of the most convincing ones is how these guys portray themselves in the stories that they write. Like, here's human nature, and you'll understand this. Human nature, human tendency is to fabricate what happened if what happened was embarrassing. We do this all the time. Like, when we tell the story, if the story of what we did or what we experienced when we're sharing it with someone else, if it's embarrassing, the normal tendency is to diminish the embarrassing parts and highlight the rest. We'll like change a few details, or we'll notoriously leave out a couple of details, and parts of the story will get smaller and other parts will get bigger because we don't like to tell stories that actually embarrass ourselves. This is why when men go fishing, they tell you that they caught this fish when really they caught this fish. Same fish, by the way. I just moved the camera back. I'll give you another one. Here's another one. They tell you that they caught this fish when in reality they caught that fish. That is not AI generated. I caught both of those fish. I don't even know how the hook got in that one's mouth, but I will tell you, I caught this fish using that fish as bait. I didn't really. Some of you are like, that's so mean. That's the way nature works, right? But this is how we tell the story. Like, if we go fishing and we catch this, and guys like, hey, how was a fishing trip? You're like, it was great. I caught a good one. Because this is human nature. Like the story, like the parts that are embarrassing, the parts that are like I'm not really proud of it. We tend to change the details. We tend to leave out details. We're just like, or we would just say, hey, I caught one. We wouldn't tell any details. But when these eyewitnesses tell the story, when they tell the historical story, they tell this version. They tell the version where they have doubts. They tell the version where they ask dumb questions to Jesus and they have dumb arguments with each other in front of Jesus. They tell the version where they're afraid. And then on the night that Jesus was arrested, they lacked faith, they were afraid, they were confused, and they literally denied him. They betrayed him. They hid. And then they recorded it, just like that. In fact, this is another detail that sometimes we overlook, that on that fateful morning that we celebrate today, the resurrection morning, Easter morning, these guys did not write themselves into the story as heroes. They weren't like standing outside the tomb, gathered a group for a pop-up worship service. You know, they're playing some great music, Phil Wickham, the king is in the room. They got confetti cannons. They're like, we knew it was going to happen. That's not how they wrote themselves into the story. They didn't have group chanting, he's alive, he's alive. You know, so on the count of three, ready, everybody, he's alive. Instead, they were hiding in the upper room saying, he's missing. We don't know what happened. And we're afraid that what happened to him is going to happen to us next. They were confused. They were afraid. Yet this is how they told the story when human nature is to write the story in such a way that it wouldn't be unflattering to us, but it would be flattering. The question is why? The answer is simple. It's because it's how it happened. The eyewitnesses weren't writing fiction. They were recording history. And I'm just telling you, some of you have been in church your whole life. You've never thought about this. Some of you have not been in church because you've never thought about this. If you can ever wrap your mind around this and engage in this way, this changes the way that you engage with a story, and I think it'll change the way that you engage with Jesus. So, while these men are hiding in the upper room, they're afraid that Jesus' fate is going to be their fate, the women go out to rewrap the body. They're like, hey, we got to go embalm Jesus. The men are like, no, we got the doors locked. The women are like, hey, look, we got stuff to do. Unlock the doors. Guys, we will lock the door behind us. It's going to be okay. So the women, they go out. They're going to re-embalm the body of Jesus. And when they get to the tomb, some of you know the story, the stone has been rolled away, and they're confused in that moment. And again, they don't assume that there's a resurrection. In fact, this is what it says. One of them says, they've taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they put him. It's not an assumption of a resurrection. It's the assumption that there's some funny business going on. Someone has stolen the body. Something is happening. In fact, this is funny. When the women tell the men that the tomb is empty, this is how the men respond. It says, but they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. That's a funny verse. Men, you cannot use that verse at home. Like, woman, your words seem to me like nonsense. It's in the Bible. That is, if you're trying to end your marriage, that's probably a good way to do it, right? Like, none of this scene made sense, right? And then Peter says, hey, you know what? I'll sort this out. So Peter runs to the tomb, sees that the body is missing, and he comes to the same conclusion. He is confused. He doesn't assume a resurrection. So there's some funny business going on. It's on the day that Jesus' body goes missing. The 10 remaining disciples are gathered in the upper room. Judas is already gone. He's hung himself. He was the betrayer. Thomas is missing. Thomas is like, hey, I'm not getting involved in this stuff. Like, I'm getting out of here. So there's only the 10 of them. And the scriptures tell us that Jesus appears to them. They've seen him die. He appears to them, and they assumed, rightfully so, that he was a ghost. Because they're like, something's not adding up. Now, how many of you have family dogs? A family dog? What do you got? Somebody yell it out. I heard Labrador. What else? Pit Bull, Beagle. Any of you got cats? I just want to know who to pray for. All right, you got. I'm just kidding. My daughters are cat people. They're like, Dad, you got to stop saying that. My daughter came in town for Easter, and her cats are like, they are in charge of my house currently as I'm here, right? So we had this dog when we were growing up, when my kids were growing up. He was a Dachshund, miniature wiener dog, and he ended up being a jumbo wiener dog by the end. That's a different story. But he was, at the end, he was real grumpy. I don't know if you've ever had a Dachshund. Had bad breath. He would hide under the blanket. So when you sat down, you sit on him, and then he's real mad, and he'd growl at you. It's like, bro, I live here, and I feed you. Like, stop growling at me. But he was our dog, and we loved him, even though he's grumpy at the end. Had him for almost 13 years. And when he died, it was super, super sad for our whole family. And for me, in particular, like, I had to bury him. I was the one that buried him. And it was just really sad. Now, I want you to imagine that the day after I buried my dog, Samson, the next day I come home, and Samson's just chilling under the table, eating food like nothing ever happened, all the leftovers. Guess what I would not assume? I would not assume, hallelujah, it's a resurrection. I would assume that someone put something in my brownies. That's what I would assume, right? Like, because dead things stay dead. That's how it works. This is not possible. These guys are in the same place. Listen, they were hiding in the back as Jesus was crucified because they were afraid and they had already betrayed him, but they were watching. And they watched as the crown of thorns went on, and they watched as the spear pierced his side, confirming that he was in fact dead. They knew exactly where he was buried. Yet here Jesus is in the room with them saying, hey guys, I'm really hungry. Like, he's like, I'm hungry. To which I'm like, dude's famished, right? 3 days. He hadn't eaten in 3 days. Somebody get him a burger. Like, he's right there in the midst. And if you can imagine how confusing and disorienting this is. And that's where our story picks up with the book of John and John's account as John is writing this down. In John's narrative, one of the portions, he focuses on Thomas. This word has started to spread that Jesus, the rabbi, is alive, and people are like, that doesn't make any sense. And so Thomas enters the story, and I actually believe that Thomas gets a bad rap. This is where John starts. It says, now Thomas, also known as Didymus, which, by the way, if you don't know, in Greek, Didymus means twin. So it means that he probably had a twin. So Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. They're like, dude, we got to tell you what happened. We were in the upper room. This is what happened. Like, you're telling them the story. And I love Thomas's response. He says this. He says, I knew it. I tried to tell you guys, but no one would listen. Now, some of you aren't sure if you should laugh or not. You're like, I don't think that's in the Bible. That's not even close to what Thomas said if you've ever read the story. This is what he actually said. He says, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, he says, I will not believe. And I get that, as do some of you. Like, I've said this before. I'm really grateful that Thomas' story is in the Bible because he's one of the characters that I can most readily identify much of the time. Like, as I'm listening to this story, as I'm engaging with this story, it doesn't feel logical. It doesn't feel like what could really happen. Like, Thomas is saying, hey, guys, what you're saying doesn't make sense. I buried Samson. He can't be under the table eating the scraps. That's not how it works. Thomas is in this moment. He's like, here's how it's going to work. Until I can hold Jesus' iPhone up in front of his face and see if his face unlocks it, then I'm not going to be convinced. Like, I need verification. I need proof. And it makes sense. You know why? Because dead people normally stay dead. That's how it works. I'm actually grateful for that. I don't want to bump into somebody that passed away last week in Walmart, right? That's a good thing. And it doesn't make any sense. And I think in this moment, Thomas would have quoted the great theologian, Michael Scott, who says, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. All right, isn't it comforting though? As a logical person, you come to this story and realize one of the main characters in the story has some of the same pushback to it as perhaps what you do, or your friend that you've been inviting to church for years, the one that just says none of this makes any sense. And from this moment, I think Thomas unfairly gets branded for the rest of human history. In fact, I'll let you guys fill in the blank. What do we call him? Doubting Thomas. I actually think we should rebrand it. I think he should be called Logical Thomas. Look, it's not so much doubting, right? He's just being logical. He's like, guys, I need some proof. I saw him die. You're telling me that you guys hung out and had a meal with him? And Thomas knew the implications. Thomas had spent time with Jesus, and he knew that Jesus had claimed to be the king. He knew that Jesus had claimed to be God himself. He had heard the things that Jesus taught, and here's what Thomas knew. He's connecting the dots. If it's true that he is alive, then that means that everything that he taught and everything he said is also true, that he is in fact the king, that he is in fact God, and that all the things that he taught are in fact true. John continues, he says, a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and this time, Thomas is with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them. I love that little detail. Like, if you read the scriptures at all, this is a very Jesus thing to do. He just shows up in the room. Like, did he walk through the wall? Did he appear? I don't know. But I'm sure some of the guys were like, that tracks. That's kind of how Jesus does things. And I wonder if Thomas is all of a sudden looking, going, oh, uh-oh. And then this is what he says. He says, peace be with you. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Peace always follows Jesus. Like, when Jesus enters a life, peace follows. When Jesus enters a circumstance, when Jesus enters a culture, peace always follows. Now, when I say that, it's not always the absence of conflict. Peace is not always an absence of any kind of conflict in our life, but it is the presence of calmness. That in the midst sometimes of the storm, that God can calm us. It says, peace be with you. And then he says to Thomas, It's like the whole thing changes. Put your finger here. He's like, I know what you said, Thomas. Put your finger right here. See my hands? I want you to reach out your hand and put it into my side. Right here where the spear went. Remember you talked about the spear, Thomas? Talked about my side, you remember? And then he says this, stop doubting and believe. Literally, the Greek right there where it says stop doubting and believe, it says be not unbelieving but believing. Doubting wasn't actually in the Greek. Technically, he wasn't doubting. He was just unconvinced. To which some of us go, I get it. Maybe that's how you entered this room today, like, hey, I'm here, I'll give it a try. But I'm just not convinced because this is a big story. He hadn't moved from this unbelief to belief yet. And I would just say, look, I get it. I mean, come on, this is a big story. Here's the story that we're inviting people to believe as followers of Jesus. That God somehow became the most innocent human form of a baby, a human baby, was taken care of by his creation until he's old enough to function on his own, that he lives a full life, that he has followers as a Jewish rabbi, that one day he dies on a cross from trumped up false charges, and then 3 days later he rises again and he tells his guys, hey, I'm going to come back one day. That's what we're inviting people to believe. So I think I understand a little Thomas in us from time to time. It's a lot to grapple with. And I love this. Thomas says this. He says, my Lord and my God. In this moment, he's standing there face to face with Jesus. He's touched the hand of Jesus and the side of Jesus. And Thomas becomes convinced this is not a party trick. That I am, in fact, standing in the presence of God in this moment. And meanwhile, John, he's over there watching all this. I'm sure their eyes are big. And John's like, I have got to write this down because no one is going to believe it unless people who were here and saw it tell the world what has happened. Church tradition tells us that Thomas later traveled to India to preach the gospel. He's considered the patron saint of India. We know that Thomas was executed for his faith. We don't know a lot of the details, but church tradition says that he was stabbed with a spear and he ultimately died from the wound, from the spear, which is a bit ironic. Because Jesus told Thomas, I want you to touch my spear-pierced side as proof of life. And it was that moment that gave Thomas the courage to live his life wrapped around who the person of Jesus is and gave him the courage to die for the gospel, for the fact that Jesus was who he said. He's like, no, guys, I saw it with my own eyes. Do whatever you must to me, but you will not convince me that Jesus was not who he said, because I saw it. In the end, doubting Thomas becomes indomitable Thomas. That's a great word, isn't it? You should work that into just casual conversation this week at work. Say, I learned it at church, like indomitable. It means like relentless, never willing to stop, even to the point of death. He was unwilling to stop talking about Jesus. And here's what I would say, guys. He wasn't dying for a lie. He wasn't dying for a cover-up story. He wasn't dying for a hallucination. Thomas was willing to die. Very simple. Because of what he saw. He couldn't deny what he had seen. So let me get real and personal and pointed for just a moment because I don't want to risk wasting your Easter. Somebody say, okay, so Chris, I'll bite. Some of you are all in. You're like, I believe the story, Chris. You don't have to convince me. Others of you are like, I'll bite. So let's say this story is true. If it's true, why does it matter? Why does it matter if Jesus is who he said, if he did the things he said? Like, I'm living my life and it's working out like, okay, yeah, a couple bumps here and there and like whatever, but like, why does it actually matter? In the book of Luke, when the birth of Jesus is announced, the coming Messiah is announced by the angels, this is what the angels say about the coming of Jesus. They say that the coming of Jesus is good news for all the people, every single human. Fast forward to Jesus' final words on the cross. Just before he dies, Jesus says these three words. He says, it is finished. And when he says that, What he means is the thing that we cannot do for ourselves, that on the cross Jesus accomplished for us. Look, here's, you and I both, we can build wealth. Like, we can have some level of success. We can have some accomplishments. We can raise a family. We can even do some good in the world around us. But let me tell you what none of us can do. We can't save ourselves. In this moment, Jesus does the one thing that we cannot do for ourselves. And you know why the resurrection matters? Because it validated it. It was a final stamp to say that God is who he said and has the final authority over death and sin and everything that comes with it. And it's such an incredible thing, and this is why it matters. It is finished means that you and I don't have to live with guilt as the primary reference of our life. That alone is worth the story. We don't have to live with shame. Like, some of us carry shame, and Jesus is like, no, I took care of that. As a result of the words, it is finished, it means that we don't have to perform. Not only do we not have to perform to get God's attention, we cannot. Jesus did for us on the cross, validated in the resurrection, what we could not ever do for ourselves. As a result of these three words, it is finished, it means that you and I can live free. We can live with a purpose in relationship to God. If this is true, and God has invited us through Jesus to have a relationship with him, then it will be the greatest fulfillment of purpose and peace in every single one of our lives, even when the storms come. The last thing that Jesus says to Thomas is actually for us. This is what he says. Then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. He's like, hey, look, I get it. You didn't believe. Then you saw me, touched my hand. Now you believe. And then Jesus reaches into the future, and he talks directly to those of us listening today, and this is what he says. Blessed. That means there's going to be happiness. There's going to be a source of satisfaction and fulfillment in your life. There's going to be that. Blessed. There's a fulfillment in life to those who have not seen. That's us. Yet have believed. Jesus is saying, hey, I know it's going to be hard. It was hard for even some of the guys who saw. But there are going to be generations of people that don't get to see with their eyes, and they have to trust in these eyewitnesses. And he's saying, man, you want true fulfillment in life, satisfaction in life. Those who have never laid their eyes on me yet choose to trust based on these eyewitnesses. He said, it's going to be a fulfilled life like you can never imagine. My whole life has been about this. Like, I am not doing this because I have to. I encountered Jesus, and it changed my life. I've never physically seen him with my eyes, but I've encountered him, and this is my prayer, this is my hope, is that you won't just go through the routines of an Easter story and the Easter traditions, but that at some point you would encounter the living King that loves you, that did for you and me what we cannot do for ourselves. My hope is that for every one of you at some point in your journey, maybe today, you move from unconvinced to convinced, from unbelief to belief. It will change the quality of your life, and it will change the destination of your life, eternal life with God. Remember Fuego, this story should have never survived the first century. Yet here we are, an entire movement around Jesus, 4.5 billion people on the planet that believe that Jesus is who he said. And I think this is important. You don't have to understand everything. I've been studying the scriptures for a long time. There are still things I can't wrap my mind around. You don't have to understand everything in order to believe something. The question this Easter is very simple. Will you follow Jesus? Bring your questions in tow. Will you follow Jesus? Like, you can answer and work out and sort out the rest of the things along the way. Later, Paul, who would have a profound encounter with God as well, with Jesus as well, he would write these words down, and he said this. He says, listen, here's the thing. Here's what it means to follow Jesus. If you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, that he's the master, he's in charge, and you believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, that's what we're talking about today. Then he says this, Not you might or maybe or hopefully, or if you work hard and combine it with that. He says, if you do that, you will be saved. Better life now, better destination later. This is the invitation of Easter. This is the beautiful nature of the gospel. So I want to close this time. We're going to sing, the band's going to lead us in a song in just a moment. But I want to close this time doing what I do every single Easter. I want to give you an opportunity to say, hey, I'm moving from unbelief to belief. I'm moving from unconvinced to convinced. And you get to bring in tow some of your questions. You don't have to sort them all out. And you can borrow my words. There's no magic words, but I would encourage you to make it your prayer. If you want to close your eyes and bow your heads for just a moment. If you say, hey, Chris, I'm ready. Or I'm not sure if I'm a believer and I just want to make sure. I'll give you some words. In fact, I'm going to steal a little bit of Paul's words. Maybe you just say today, Jesus, I'm coming. I'm coming with a humility. I'm coming believing that you can do for me and have done for me something that I cannot do for myself. And so today I confess with my mouth that Jesus, you are Lord, and I believe in my heart that God, even though it is so hard for me to understand and wrap my mind around, I believe that you have raised Jesus from the dead. Jesus, will you forgive me of my sins? Today I choose to follow you. If you pray that, you mean it. It's the beginning of the most amazing journey of life. The reason that I think we're still here because God is patient, wanting that none should perish, but as many as possible would come to an understanding of repentance and who Jesus is. Father, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for who you are and what you've done. I pray that in these next moments that we would just be able to celebrate you for who you are. In Jesus' precious and powerful name we pray. Amen.